Chapter 166, Queen of the Night Demons. The Devildom of Helmuth, a nation that was well suited for the lives of both humans and demon folk. The citizens who lived here were guaranteed a minimum living standard even if they didn't do any work. The ancient undead raised by high-ranking demon folk and black wizards along with the countless demonic beasts contracted by the Demon King did all the work that citizens would usually have done. Thanks to this, Helmuth's vast farmlands were always covered in golden wheat regardless of the season. Helmuth's citizens didn't have to pay their taxes with money. Instead, they paid their taxes in the form of life force. In other words, even if they didn't have a single penny in their pocket, it was possible for them to keep to a minimum standard of living just by regularly offering some life force to Helmuth. However, like with most beings, their greed was endless. Just by mortgaging their souls and accepting the condition that they would be put to work for 10 years after their death, humans who emigrated to Helmuth were able to enjoy a luxurious life. As for the demon folk, they weren't much different from humans in terms of greed. However, demon folk weren't as quick to bargain with their souls as the humans. Because they were familiar with contracts of the soul, the demon folk were well aware of how dangerous they were and how much care needed to be taken when bargaining with their own souls as a collateral. That was why demon folk preferred to do work personally instead of deferring it to after their deaths. While it was true that undead and demonic beast workers were convenient to use, Helmuth didn't persecute those who chose to work on their own volition. If there was anyone who wanted a job, then they were given priority in being provided with a job. That was just how capable Helmuth's Ministry of Employment and Labor was, and how much the great Demon King who ruled this immense empire respected and guaranteed all the rights and freedoms of his people. Thanks to that, on this construction site, apart from the undead laborers, there were also many of the lowest-ranking demon folk at work. They had agreed to be paid in some turbid life force and 100,000 sals for today's labor. Of course, what these common demon folk really wanted was the life force rather than the cash. For demon folk, life force was essential for the growth of their strength. However, who the hell would want to make a contract with these common demon folk to provide them with their needed souls and life force? Therefore, the Ministry of Employment and Labor had passed a regulation. Common demon folk were to be paid with the lowest kind of life force as part of their wages. Oh, how generous of the Demon King of Incarceration. But who could have imagined that such a scene would take place at a construction site like this? Heave-ho! Heave-ho! Shouted a woman dressed in a yellow hard hat and a worker's overalls. Who was this woman who was dancing at the top of an observation tower, shouting out roars of encouragement as if she was singing, and waving a pair of traffic wands in both hands like they were a pair of cheerleader pom-poms? Put your back into it. Hold on 1 second. You over there. Stop fooling around. It isn't break time yet. The woman blew into the whistle that was hanging around her neck. Peep. One of the common demon folk who had been crouching in a hidden corner of the construction site let out a sigh and stood back up. Just who the hell is that lady? He asked one of his fellow co-workers. Who knows, came the panting reply. Why would there be a cheerleader at a construction site? A who? Slurp, a human? Mr. Komu, you're not thinking of doing anything strange, are you? This isn't some back alley slum or a sewer. If you so much as drool at a human, you'll be charged with an offense and get your soul even further restricted. Slurp. I know. But you're a prior offender, Mr. Komu. That's why you need to be even more careful. The restrictions on your soul have already made holding a conversation difficult. How much more difficult will it be if the next restriction leaves you with a vocal ban? Slurp. At these words from the Cyclops, Gargal, a gloomy expression slid across the face of the sewer slime demon folk, Komu. Apart from a few outliers like Gargal, lower-ranking demon folk were usually quite far from humans in appearance. This couldn't be helped, as most common demon folk were actually demonic beasts that had gained self-awareness and become sentient. Heave-ho! After confirming that the common demon folk had gotten up and started working again, the woman resumed swinging around her traffic wands while shouting out cheers of encouragement. If you hold on a bit longer, it will be time for lunch. Although you should all already be aware of this, the lunch prepared for you today will be based on the questionnaire that you filled out this morning. Within the legal limits, of course. Sometimes there were a few demon folk who went overboard with their requests. Perhaps because they weren't good at studying and were ignorant, there were a few idiots who would write down things like human flesh on the lunch menu questionnaire. That was why the woman had emphasized, within the legal limits while shouting. We're only able to prepare all of these meals according to your desires thanks to the grace of Duchess Noor Giabella, who's both the client for this construction site and the CEO of our dreaming construction company. Now then, all workers, make sure to thank Duchess Giabella. Let's all shout together now. After a few moments' pause, the workers followed the instruction. Our thanks to Duchess Giabella. Their loud roar echoed all throughout the forest around the construction site. The woman spun around with a happy expression on her face at these ringing shouts. Then she leapt off the top of the extremely tall observation tower. How impressive, commented a man with neatly combed hair, dressed in a black suit, who was standing at the bottom of the observation tower. On his shoulders were a pair of golden epaulets and his chest was covered in ornate medals. In spite of his gaudy appearance, no one on the construction site seemed to be aware of the man. And it wasn't just the man either. Of the workers busily strolling around, none of them paid any attention to the woman who had just jumped down from the towering observation desk. What do you mean by that? The woman asked. I was just in awe of how thick your skin is, the man explained. Aha, you're talking about there, thanks to Duchess Giabella. Did that annoy you? The woman asked as she took off her hard hat. Abundant waves of black hair that seemed impossible to have been able to fit inside that hard hat poured down her back. If that's the case, then I'll make sure to include your name for next time. Thanks to Duchess Giabella. Thanks to Duke Lindman. How does that sound? The Queen of the Night Demons, Noor Giabella, asked him with a grin. In the face of her bright smile, Gavid Lindman shrugged. That's not what I was trying to point out. After all, I've already known for hundreds of years that you're someone who's practically overflowing with narcissism. Then what exactly could be bothering our dear Duke Lindman? Aren't you fully aware that all the meals served here are just porridge that only barely qualifies as food in terms of providing nutrition, much less taste like anything? As long as they're happy when they're putting it in their mouths, it doesn't matter if they aren't actually eating the real thing, right? Noor Giabella said with a smile as her eyes twinkled like a sky full of stars. Also, since we've made sure of its nutritional value, I feel like the point you're trying to make is out of line. I'm just making sure that they see the things that they want to eat and they're actually able to taste those foods while they're eating the porridge. This was all due to the ability of her demonies of fantasy. The ability of her demonies had been passed down as a legend even amongst the night demons, whose existence trod the lines between reality and dreams. Noor Giabella had already been a powerful night demon from the beginning, but a long time ago she had gotten her hands on the demonies of fantasy and replaced her own natural eyes. Ever since then, Noor Giabella had been titled the Queen of the Night Demons. Now, several hundreds of years later, she had become the ruler of one of the most powerful greater demon folk tribes in all of the Devildom of Helmuth. Noor Giabella got to the point, there's no way that someone of your stature would really come here just to ask about an issue with the rations we serve our workers, right? In the first place, I haven't done anything that might be considered a violation of our majestic Demon King's laws. Please don't be concerned. There's no official reason why I've come to you today. If I had to say why, then it would just be personal curiosity, stated Incarceration's Blade. He looked around with a calm gaze and listened to the loud noise resounding as this huge forest was being felled at the order of Noor Giabella. As I've already told you, I went and got permission before doing anything, Noor pouted. I know. This forest has been yours for some time now and you're free to do whatever you wish with it. As long as you can afford the cost, of course. Gavid then turned his head to stare at Noir and asked, but just what in the world do you intend to do in this forest? I'm going to build a casino, Noir proudly declared. Isn't this site a bit too large for just building a casino? Gavid pointed out. The casino will be pointless if we just keep it isolated in a forest. So firstly, I'm going to clear away everything. Then I'll start with a casino and a hotel. And after that, I plan on building all sorts of things, Noor replied with a grin. To put it simply, I'm planning on creating a huge tourist facility that will serve as my official headquarters, with my night demons hired as staff. I might also arrange some play facilities for children and maybe build a museum dedicated to enshrining my exploits. I also want to erect a few statues. Would you like me to put something up for you as well? No matter what I do, it will be difficult for me to decorate the place all by myself. How about something for the Demon King of Incarceration? Gavid eventually asked. What would be the point of that? Statues of the Demon King of Incarceration have already been erected all across Helmuth, and every public library is packed full of biographies commemorating the Demon King's achievements, Moore said doubtfully. Gavid piously declared, no matter how much worship and reverence for the Lord abound, it will never be enough. That's why I want some for myself, Moore stated jealously. Since it's my land in any case, there's no problem with me making something to gather some attention for myself now, is there? The Giabella Park will become the best tourist attraction in all of Helmuth. I guarantee it. Had she already decided on the name? Gavid just nodded with a wry smile. If you've made up your mind already, then you should just do as you please. As long as you carefully select the skills of the night demons you'll be employing. I can't even imagine how much life force you'll end up extracting from the tourists, Gavid sighed in admiration. I won't avoid paying my taxes, so you don't need to worry about that, Moore promised. I'm well aware that you keep your hands scrupulously clean when it comes to such matters. However, do be careful to keep the greed of the night demons serving you under control, Gavid warned. Have the children under my command ever been accused of violating the standardized intake of life force? Moore huffed. I'm talking about a different sort of greed, Gavid said as he stared at Noir with his calm, deep-set eyes. Oh, Noir nodded her head with a grin. I already told you this 3 years ago, but I won't make any excuses for Ulfr. After rising to the position of Baron, he got ahead of himself. Owen Ulfr, an incubus who had once held the title of Baron. 3 years before, he had tried to make a contract with Uad Lionheart. In fact, a demon folk making a contract with a human wasn't a crime. However, the other party just happened to be the eldest son of the Lionheart clan's direct line. Since the Lionheart clan was enraged by this matter, the Demon King of Incarceration had personally apologized for causing any offense to his dear Vermouth's clan by beheading Ulfr. Moore gasped. No way. Are you suspecting that I was involved in the rebellion that took place at the Black Lion Castle a while ago? You have set a precedent for it, Gavid confirmed. This is so distressing. I never even told Ulfr to try and sign a contract with a young master from the Lionheart clan. Moore tilted her head to the side in perplexity. And likewise, I wasn't involved with the rebellion at the Black Lion Castle this time either. Not everything about the rebellion that had taken place at the Black Lion Castle had been fully made public yet. Uad Lionheart, the eldest son of the main family, Dominic Lionheart, a captain of the Knights of the Black Lion, Hector Lionheart, a member of a collateral branch, those three and a secret cabal within the collateral branches, known as the Pride, who harbored resentment toward the main family, had attempted to conduct an evil ritual at the Black Lion Castle. In the process, Deacon Lionheart from a collateral line and the council head Doynes Lionheart had been murdered. Uad and Dominic, who had planned this incident, had also perished. Hector Lionheart had escaped, and the families involved in Pride went into hiding. That was all that had been made known to the public. The spirit of darkness and the remnants of the Demon Kings, as well as the attempt to resurrect a Demon King with them, hadn't been revealed. In the first place, what reason would I have for getting involved? Moore continued. However, even if the Lionhearts hadn't made it public, demon folk like these two who had lived for such a long time could make a somewhat educated guess as to the aim of the terrible ritual Uad had attempted to perform. Doynes had died and Dominic had been involved in this scheme. This meant that the Annihilation Hammer and the Demon Spear had been involved in the ritual. But how could three people with a knightly background, who logically had no knowledge of the magic, rules and sacrifices involved in rituals like these, have performed such a dangerous ritual? Something had helped those three prepare such a ritual. If the Annihilation Hammer and the Demon Spear had both been brought to the ritual site, then it was obvious what kind of existence had planned the ritual. What reasons could I have for desiring the resurrection of the Demon Kings of Carnage and Cruelty, who died 300 years ago? Moore asked rhetorically. All demon folk dreamed of ascending to the throne of a Demon King someday. And as the Queen of the Night Demons, Giabella was one of the few among the countless demon folk who was closest to the position of a Demon King. Moore attempted to cast Gavid's suspicions elsewhere. Think about the members of the households of Carnage and Cruelty who have survived these past 300 years. They might be the only ones who would hope for the success of such a ritual. As long as they haven't lost their loyalty to the Demon Kings by now, that is. Gavid Lindman gave another wry smile at these words. It was strange to hear these words coming from the mouth of none other than Giabella. Like she had said, there were still members of Cruelty and Carnage's households who survived even now, after 300 years had passed. However, would they still have the same collective strength as they had shown on the battlefield in the past? The answer was no. Most of them had since lost their strength. Over this long period of 300 years, they had lost themselves to sweet pleasures, allowing their bodies and minds to fall apart. And it was Noir Giabella who had personally arranged this. She had sent a large number of the night demons who served her to comfort these surviving war heroes. And by the time Noir Giabella decided to personally intervene, the veteran demon folk had become degenerate enough that they were even willing to sign contracts that put their strength up as a collateral. Indeed, there's no reason why you would be involved, Gavid eventually agreed. If you really do need to suspect someone, then instead of me, how about visiting the Dragon Demon Castle? Noir let out a short laugh. Though, I don't think that Dragon, drunk on his own sense of self-importance, will actually open the door to you. You don't need to be concerned with the Dragon Demon Castle, Gavid reminded her. How long do you plan on letting them go on like this? Don't you know just how merciful I've been? If I had my way, then I would definitely take a bite out of them as well, Noir admitted greedily. Gavid lectured her. The title of Helmuth's Three Princes has meaning because there are three of us. You, the Queen of the Night Demons. Me, the Blade of Incarceration, and the first dragon to fall. His Majesty does not wish for this balance to be disturbed. How disappointing, really. I don't think that I'll ever get a better chance to taste a dragon in my lifetime, Noir muttered as she licked her lower lip. Is swallowing this whole forest not enough for you? Gavid asked as he looked around said forest. Noir scoffed. There's no way that you're actually feeling pity for her, are you? Originally, this forest was the territory of the Rakshasa princess Iris. For the past 300 years she had lived in this forest along with the dark elves under her command, working hard for the revival of the Fury Independence Army and her inheritance of the throne of the Demon King of Fury. However, not long ago the Queen of the Night Demons and the Rakshasa princess had waged a gambling battle for each other's territories. Noir calmly confessed, I admit that there was some prodding from my side. However, I had no choice but to do so. That girl, Iris, even though her race has nothing to be proud of, can you believe that she actually looked down on me and mocked me by calling me Queen of the Whores? Conflicts such as territorial disputes and duels meant to establish the pecking order were a common sight in Helmuth. Just going back 300 years, the demon folk had been a horde of conquerors indiscriminately seeking to tear the continent into pieces. Certainly, they were now trying to get along with the other races, but the demon folk still thought that the best and most simple way to get ahead in life was to compare their strength against their rivals instead of getting mediation from a third party. That was why Noir Giabella and Iris had also gotten into a territorial battle. Was it because the grievances accumulated over 300 years had finally burst open? That was indeed part of it, but a greater part was because of Noir Giabella's plans for securing her future. Recently, Iris had started to recruit beast folk as mercenaries, a sign that she had begun to abandon her obsession with solely ruling over the Dark Elves. In fact, this challenge was also something that Iris had been willing to accept. This forest was all that Iris had claimed as her territory. On the other hand, the Duchy of Noir Giabella was considered to be one of the largest and wealthiest lands in all of Helmuth. If Iris were to have won this territorial battle, she would have gained control of Noir's entire duchy, so it had seemed well worth the risk. Just for sparing her, she should be thankful to me for the rest of her life, Noir said with a snort. I heard that it was a landslide victory, Gavid commented. Although I didn't allow any spectators. If you had asked, I would have allowed you to attend as an exception. What's the fun in watching a contest with such an obvious outcome? Still, she wasn't that weak, Noir conceded. It seems that she worked pretty hard during these past 300 years. Not that it would be enough to overtake you, the left hand of the Demon King. Did you hear what Iris had been up to since leaving Helmuth? Gavid asked. Being defeated in a territorial battle didn't necessarily mean being forced to leave Helmuth, but Iris had indeed left Helmuth with all of her dark elves. Was it out of humiliation? Perhaps partly, but it was also likely because she had realized just how difficult life in Helmuth was going to be now that her entire territory had been taken from her. Helmuth didn't hold such a high opinion of dark elves in the first place, and the Rakshasa princess herself had also made many enemies due to her strong self-esteem. Since she had lost her territory, she would have had to go to another demonfolk's territory for shelter, But with Iris's personality, she was bound to die rather than bow her head. I heard that she actually smuggled herself into Kiel and tried to take one of the Lionhearts hostage, Gavid shared. She must be insane, Noor snorted in laughter as she put the hard hat back on her head. If she wanted a hostage, did she try to take Eugene Lionheart? It seems that you've also remembered his name, Gavid observed. It's not like his name is trivial enough that I would forget it easily, no? It's said that he is the youngest to have ever been given permission to enter Akron, and he's even borrowed ownership of Akasha from that Sienna girl. Sienna Meridian. Do you think that she's really still alive? Since ownership of Akasha was finally transferred after being without a master for hundreds of years, then I believe that she should still be alive. Even as she was speaking, Noor picked up the traffic wands that she had set down. However, she wouldn't be in great condition now, would she? Noor mused. If she was in good shape, then she wouldn't have stayed silent for these past hundreds of years. Instead, she might have immediately snuck into Helmuth and tried to assassinate the Demon King. Please don't say something so profane, Gavid protested. But it's the truth, isn't it? Both you and I know through first-hand experience just how strong Sienna Meridian was and how much she hated demon folk. Especially since there were several times when we faced a crisis due to Sienna Meridian's magic. As she pulled a safety vest over her work jumpsuit, Noor looked back over her shoulder at Gavid and said with a grin, "But indeed you probably have a clearer impression of Hamel Dynas than Sienna, right? Although I have no wish to insult the Lord's abilities, Hamel's death truly was fortunate," Gavid admitted as he retraced old memories. Thinking back to his first meeting with Hamel Dynas, Sienna Meridian had also been present at that time. The two had been exploring a site ahead of the party in order to perform some reconnaissance, and they happened to meet Gavid by chance. He had thought that it was a great opportunity, so Gavid had tried to kill them both, but he had failed. Fortunately, it hadn't become a lifelong regret that Gavid hadn't been able to kill them at that time. Before he could even reach the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration, Hamel Dynas had collapsed midway. If that Hamel guy had survived, then the oath may not have been sworn, Noor hypothesized. He was the only one among Vermouth's companions who would actually stand up to Vermouth. He had a truly terrible personality. That might be why he died so early, Gavid muttered as he took a step back. Noor stared at Gavid with a mischievous smile as he prepared to slip away. You said that Iris tried to take Eugene Lionheart hostage, right? Noor brought another thing up just as Gavid was about to leave. That's right, Gavid confirmed. If it ended as just an attempt, does that mean Eugene Lionheart was actually able to hold off Iris? That could arguably be the case. While I might not have had any real desire for the eldest son of the Lionheart clan, Fufu, that Eugene Lionheart sounds quite delectable. Do you think that he might come to play in Helmuth? Or else stop by one of our succubi shops? Noor drooled eagerly. Don't be ridiculous, Gavid said as his face contorted into a grimace. Chapter 167. Extra, their first meeting 1. Fuck, are you being serious right now? But I've already told you so many times, it's not something I can arrange just because you insist on it. There are so many ships in this port, but are you seriously telling me that none of them are willing to set sail? Bonk. The wooden table shook like it was about to break. The receptionist's body trembled in the face of this violent outburst. Intense pressure was weighing down on him, keeping him from moving. The receptionist knew that it wasn't that the man in front of him was incapable of breaking the table with that blow just now. It was that he had chosen not to. And no matter how much you push me, I can't do what I can't, the poor receptionist insisted. Push you? Should I show you what it looks like when I really push you? The man cursed. Fuck, I went through so much to get here. I might as well grab a ship, cut the anchor lines and set sail by myself. Please. You need to understand the situation. The reception's desperate pleas abruptly cut off. The bloodshot eyes glaring down at him from the man in front of the receptionist made it feel like a grip was tightening around his heart. Unable to continue speaking, the receptionist desperately diverted his gaze. A voice suddenly rang out. No matter how lacking in manners you might be, you shouldn't go that far, right? I guess that's just how terrible this world has become, another voice sighed. The man heard a rattling noise approach from behind him. The receptionist's face turned pale as the corner of the man's lips twisted up in a smile. I was wondering which sons of bitches had started yapping, the man began as he turned around, still smiling. Standing there was a group of young knights whose soft faces didn't have even a single scar between them. Their armor, which had been diligently polished and even oiled, shone in the sun. But it turns out that instead of a pair of bitches, it's just a couple of cute puppies, the man finished with a mocking chuckle. What did you just say? Faced with this vulgar mockery, the knights' expressions darkened. The sigil of their knightly order engraved onto their chest plate declared they were members of the Silverwing Knights of Tiraz. Upon seeing their sigil, the man burst into laughter once more. Just by looking at you, I can tell that you're just a couple of scumbags who've barely managed to graduate from their apprenticeships. Or are you really supposed to be here doing this? Your boss just had his legs cut off the other day, the man reminded them. What do you mean by that? A knight muttered. I'm saying that you should go and clean up the piss and shit of your captain, who's been confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life, the man said with a snicker as he plopped his ass on top of the receptionist's desk. In a battle a few days ago, the entire mercenary guild building had been blown to pieces, so a temporary reception desk had to be set up on the roadside to deal with any mission reports. It was thanks to that an incident like this occurred. One of the knights sputtered furiously, "A mercenary bastard like you dares to act so insane." Hit by this series of insults, the young knights couldn't bear it any longer and drew their swords. Seeing this, the receptionist's face was dyed with despair. Pedestrians who had just been passing by halted their steps and became spectators to this scene. Although a large-scale battle had taken place here only a few days ago, if it was watching other people fight instead of personally taking part in the terror of the battlefield, they could still find the fun in spectating. Oh, so you've drawn your blade? What's next? Are you going to throw a handkerchief? Or maybe a glove? The man snickered and waved his hand dismissively. Then he grabbed his nose and with a twisted sneer went, "Sniff sniff. Ugh, your mouth still smell of breast milk. Do you babies really think that's how you're supposed to hold your sword? Have you ever even cut someone with those knives of yours? In the first place, are you really planning on taking me down now that you've drawn your swords? Or did you think that just by drawing your swords and striking a knightly pose, you'd be able to make this mercenary bastard sneak away all on his own?" "Draw your sword," shouted a young knight who appeared to be the leader of the group. At this challenge, the man just snickered once more and stood on top of the reception desk. A few mercenaries and knights were mixed among the spectators who had stopped to watch the show. They could recognize who this man was and felt pity for these young knights who seemed to know nothing about the real world. The mercenaries trembled in horror while imagining what would happen next, and even the knights began to take a few steps back, not wanting to get caught up in the fight or get hit by any stray sparks. "My sword," the man repeated with a chuckle as he reached both hands inside the worn-out cloak draped over his shoulders. Was this guy even a swordsman in the first place? This question suddenly swirled in the minds of the knights surrounding the man. Plunk. The sound of metal hitting metal rang out from inside his cloak. It was only a small noise, but the knights flinched and stepped back. It was an unconscious reaction. Instead of retreating, what they really needed to do was step forward and swing their swords. But although they knew that was what they needed to do, their bodies had involuntarily taken a step backward. "Choose," the man commanded. Bang. When the man flapped his cloak, various weapons that had been worn on the man's body fell to the ground. There were about 3 or 4 swords of all different lengths and types, a heavy hatchet, a one-handed short spear, a whip, a flail, and many more weapons on top of that. So many that it was hard to believe he could even move while carrying all these weapons on his body. The man elaborated, "As you can see, I can use many weapons apart from just swords. Do you have any weapons that you would prefer me to use?" A knight hesitated. You're just bluffing." "A bluff? Alright. I guess that means you don't want to make a choice yourself? If that's the case, I'll have to choose carefully for you." It appeared that he still had more weapons he hadn't yet taken out as the man moved his open hands back inside his cloak. The eyes of the knights watching him unconsciously began to tremble with anxiety. For some unknown reason, a tingling sensation was spreading across their skin. "How about this?" the man asked with a broad smile that stretched the scars on his cheeks. When he started pulling his hands out from inside the cloak, the knights gasped and took another step backward, only to freeze when the man finished his action. The man's hands were balled up into fists with his middle fingers raised. The man kept a serious expression on his face as he waved his middle fingers in an eye-catching way. Breaking the silence, the man asked, "What? Is just a finger on each hand still too much?" The knights gaped in shock. That's... As the crowd burst into laughter, the knights' faces turned red in embarrassment. The humiliation and anger rising from the bottom of their hearts dispelled their mysterious fear. Almost as one, the knights charged forward. Is that really the guy you've picked? On the rooftop of a distant building, a female wizard who wore a large hat on top of her full-body robes frowned as she asked this question. Although this location was quite a long way away from the site where the fight was taking place, she was able to observe the scene as if it was taking place right in front of her nose, and she could even clearly listen to their conversation. I don't like him, another voice said. The wizard wasn't the only one watching the man. A female priest in black and white priestly robes clicked her tongue and shook her head as she said, his skill might be second to none, but as a person he's far too vulgar. I swear in God's name, that man has to be one of the rudest and most arrogant mercenaries I've ever seen in all my life. And in the first place, even his skill doesn't seem that great, the wizard said in support of the priest's words. Then the giant warrior who had climbed on top of the rooftop railing and was blocking the breeze from hitting the rest of the party, gave a heavy shake of his head and said, "No, that man's skills aren't to be taken lightly." And just why are you standing up there? The wizard asked. The way he moves has excited my body and warmed up my blood. My soul as a warrior is screaming that it wants to compete with that man, the warrior explained. Stop with your bullshit and just get down from there. Don't you feel sorry for the railing that has to carry your huge bulk? The priest asked as she rolled her eyes and stared daggers into the warrior's back. But instead of replying, the warrior just nodded his head and murmured in admiration, just what is it that makes his skills so impressive? I think I've got it. Although he said this, the wizard definitely couldn't understand what the warrior meant by this. That mercenary did seem quite strong, but with just that level of strength, the wizard couldn't see what made the man's skills so out of the ordinary. It's still not enough, the priest spoke up. She leaned forward, propping her body against the railing, and opened up the small bottle of holy water hanging from her waist as she continued. Sir Vermouth, I just can't tell why you would want to accept that mercenary as one of your companions. Vermouth Lionheart was standing a few steps behind the rest of the party. With his gray hair, which was neither black nor white, and golden eyes, which sparkled as if they had been spun out of gold, his face was so beautiful it was hard to believe that it belonged to a man, but at the same time he didn't appear fragile. I believe he is already perfect for our party as he is, Vermouth confidently stated. After bringing the holy water flask she always carried with her to her lips, Anise Slywood took several gulps of the holy water that seemed strong enough to burn her from throat to stomach with just one sip. She then glanced back at Vermouth with her narrowed eyes. Molin alone is enough to serve as our vanguard. Sir Vermouth, just what is it that you're expecting from that mercenary? What do you think that mercenary can do for us that makes you so insistent on accepting him as a member of our party? Anise questioned sharply. I also agree with what Anise is saying. While riding her hat that had started to tilt forward, Sienna Meridian continued speaking. I don't have much skill in melee, but that mercenary doesn't seem stronger than Molin, though he seems even more barbaric than Molin. So what help does it serve to add one more idiot? I'm not an idiot, Molin chipped in. If that mercenary isn't as good at guarding our front as Molin, what is he supposed to be doing? Getting in close. Since we have you, Vermouth, do we really need another close combatant? Or could it be that, unlike his appearance, that mercenary is also a devout cleric? Sienna asked with a doubtful snort as she reached her hand out to the holy water flask that Anise had set down on the railing. If he's a priest with more faith than our holy water addict here and who can work more powerful miracles, then... it should be fine to accept high. Anise interrupted her. There's no way that would be the case, right? Flap. Anise's hand fiercely slapped away the back of Sienna's hand as she declared, I am the saint of light. No priest exists in this world whose faith is even slightly close to mine. That is why I am the one who was chosen to accompany Sir Vermouth on this journey. Can't you just give me one sip? Sienna pleaded. No way, Anise rejected firmly. Sienna's shoulders drooped at this resolute refusal. He's not someone you can look down on, Molin Roar insisted as he stepped down from the railing. That man's attacks and movements might seem crude, but every action flows as smoothly and flexibly as flowing water. All corners of his martial skills have been polished to the extent that ordinary people can't even begin to imagine, and it's not just that. What do you mean it's not just that? Sienna repeated curiously. I can't explain it exactly, but some kind of unique temperament is mixed into that guy's skills, Molan confidently claimed. Molan, you by any chance did Vermouth ask you a favor in advance? Did Vermouth ask you to back him up a bit? Sienna asked suspiciously. Vermouth hasn't asked me to do something like that, Molan denied. Of course she had known that would be the case. Sienna pouted her lips as she glanced back at Vermouth. It was just that this was the first time that Vermouth had shown such confusing stubbornness. On the way here they had seen several would-be heroes, and among them, there had also been quite a few who were inspired by Vermouth's feats and had asked to be accepted as a companion. But why is he trying to invite someone who's just a petty mercenary to be our companion? Sienna thought to herself with frustration. She had to admit that this mercenary was also a famous figure among the other mercenaries. A young mercenary who was able to skillfully wield all kinds of weapons and return alive from even the harshest battlefields. A ghost of the battlefield who wasn't part of any mercenary company, who didn't lead any subordinates, and instead of pursuing the highest pay he wandered solely in search of battlefields full of demonic beasts. That mercenary was Hamildina's. This is my first time making such a request, Vermouth finally spoke up. He stepped closer to the railing and continued, but from now on, I won't be making any similar requests of you. Sir Vermouth, Anise hesitantly called out. Anise, Vermouth responded. You asked me what that mercenary can do for us and what exactly I'm expecting from him, right? Down there the fight was already over. All the 7 knights who had surrounded Hamil had one of their limbs broken and were now sprawled across the ground. Hamil was gathering the swords that the knights had dropped and examining them. Even though he was stealing their weapons so openly, none of the onlookers attempted to stop him. I'm not sure what he'll be able to do either, Vermouth admitted. However, he definitely has something that I want. Huh? Anise grunted. I want him to fight alongside us, Vermouth said with a faint smile. Anise's eyes widened into circles at this smile. Anise wasn't the only one showing such a surprised expression. Even Sienna, who had stealthily been creeping closer to Anise's holy water flask, froze in mid-action, and Molan, who had been traveling with Vermouth for the longest time, felt his jaw drop. Currently his skills might not be reliable enough. However, he will be able to catch up to us very quickly, Vermouth promised. It's not enough just to catch up with us. Vermouth, you know that as well, right? We'll be going to Helmuth soon, and from there we're going to slay the demon kings, Sienna argued once she had calmed down from her surprise and stretched out a finger to point at Hamil. That guy who just blatantly knocks out a bunch of young knights and steals their swords. There's no way that he'll be able to fight alongside us. Vermouth interrupted her. He'll fight and he'll be able to stand at our side in no time. Sir Vermouth, did you receive an oracle? Anise asked in a trembling voice. At this, Vermouth just shook his head slowly and replied, It's not a prediction. It's just my stubborn insistence. I intend to make him my companion somehow, so I'm doing what I can to try and convince you. Arg. Sienna suddenly groaned and shook her head as she felt her chest constrict in annoyance at Vermouth's frank admission. So what? Are we just going to stand here watching him? If you're going to make him our companion, shouldn't we just go over there and talk with him? Let's go and say hello, shake hands and test our strength against each other, Molan proposed. Then let's raise a glass to our fallen foes. If we do that, we're sure to become friends. I really didn't want to make any more barbaric and foolish friends like you, Anise sighed, still unconvinced and appearing dissatisfied. However, since Vermouth had already gone so far to make such a request, she didn't want to refuse him anymore. The same went for Sienna as well. Among the members of their party, the only one who had accepted Vermouth's insistence from the start without any complaints was Molan. What exactly does he have? That idiot Molan had said that he felt something. However, Sienna and Anise didn't feel anything from Hamil. Was there really something that could only be seen by warriors? A low-class mercenary with a rough demeanor. That was all that they could see in Hamil. Nothing more and nothing less. And who are you lot? Or at least that had been Sienna's impression of him when looking from afar. But would things really change when looking at Hamil from up close? Sienna glared down at Hamil with a doubtful expression. I'm asking you, why the hell did you suddenly fly over just to fucking glare at someone? Wasn't he being too cheeky with people he was meeting for the first time? Sienna's eyes twitched in irritation as she continued glaring at Hamil. He had a large scar on his left cheek. In addition to that, there were several other small scars on his face. His upturned eyes were hostile enough that you could tell he had a dirty personality from just a glance. Hamel Dinas, Vermouth said as he was the first to float down from the sky and land in front of Hamel. While pressing down his grey windswept hair with one hand, he approached Hamel and asked, "Have you eaten yet?" Hamel and everyone else's faces went blank in surprise at Vermouth's sudden question. "What?" Hamel just grunted. "It seems like you haven't eaten yet, so why not have a meal together with us?" Vermouth said as he spun around on the spot. Chapter 168. Extra, their first meeting too. Did this guy really just invite him to share a meal? Then without even waiting for a reply, he just left on his own. Given Hamel's personality, it wouldn't have been strange for him to have slapped this insolent guy who seemed to be messing with him on the back of the head, but the unique atmosphere that Vermouth gave off suppressed Hamel's impulse to choose violence. Hamel was well aware of what this feeling was. It was a warning that he shouldn't touch this guy, that if they fought he would be the one defeated, and if at all possible Hamel shouldn't get involved with this guy. Fuck, Hamel cursed as he felt annoyed at allowing himself to be held back by such a feeling. It wasn't like this guy had shown him any hostility, nor had they met on the battlefield. They had just met on the street. No, come to think about it, this guy had just one-sidedly approached Hamel and then suddenly invited him to share a meal. Wait, no. In the first place, who the hell were they? They had addressed him as Hamel Dinas, and yeah, that's right, that was his name. So why the fuck weren't they introducing themselves? And who the fuck did those two think they were, flying down from the sky and staring at him with those disrespectfully judgmental eyes? And lastly, why was that hulking bastard with bulging muscles looking at him with sparkling eyes that didn't match the fierce expression on his face? A stone caught on Hamel's foot. As if the heavens had arranged it, the stone was in the perfect position for him to kick it. But wasn't it only natural for there to be stones in a place like this? Eugene glared at the back of Vermouth's head, who was slowly getting further away, and at the backs of Sienna and Anise, who were following Vermouth as they continued to exude an air of disdain for him. Molen was still at Hamel's side. As he looked down at Hamel with a hearty smile, Molen discovered that Hamel's body seemed to have been designed and developed solely for conflict. Molen began to imagine just how flexibly and unpredictably such a body would be able to move once a battle began, and this imagined scenario progressed into a full-fledged confrontation inside of his head. He's strong, but I still won, Molen thought. Not, I can win, but I won. Their battle had already come to a conclusion inside of Molen's head, and he nodded confidently at the result. As a brave warrior of the northern Buyur tribe, the son of the snowfields, he approached Hamel, who was to become his new comrade, and stretched out his hand. "Come on, let's go together," Molen offered. Hamel was unresponsive and seemed flustered by Vermouth's sudden invitation. Wanting to build a wonderful friendship with a man like Hamel, who would become his comrade in the near future, Molen tried to lightly pat Hamel's shoulder as an early sign of their friendship. But at that moment, Hamel suddenly kicked the stone at his foot. The target of this kick was, of course, the back of Vermouth's head. He kicked the stone so hard that if it were to hit, the force would be enough to explode an ordinary man's head. But there was no way that it would hit. Before he had kicked the stone, and afterward as well, Hamel had already had such an expectation. And indeed that was the case. The stone that Hamel had kicked, after flying just one step forwards, disappeared as if it had never existed in the first place. "Ho!" Hamel huffed in astonishment. Hamel had a clear view of what had just happened. The flying stone was caught in an elaborately constructed web of mana and then vanished. But the process was so fast that it had made it seem as if the stone hadn't even been sent flying in the first place. "Ha!" Hamel laughed reluctantly. Even though they had already walked so far ahead, they had been able to prepare such a mana construct without any warning of an attack. It was an extravagant display of skill to use such a construct just to block a single stone. Although his practical joke had been impeded right away, Hamel found himself more interested than embarrassed. Hamel had always been confident in his skills in mana manipulation, but he wasn't sure that he would be able to do something as stealthy and sophisticated as what Vermouth had just shown him. Though he hadn't wanted to accept Vermouth's offer of sharing a meal together, the fact that Vermouth didn't look back even once after doing something like that made Hamel follow in their steps. "Sienna." Vermouth called out Sienna's name in a low voice, still not turning around to look backward. "Don't do it. Where the hell did you find such a bastard?" Sienna cursed with a click of her tongue as she scattered the spell she had just prepared, vanishing the sharp blade of mana that had been floating in front of them. I know mercenaries can be barbaric, but that bastard seems to be one of the most vicious, even amongst his kind. Vermouth, do you realize what he just tried to do? That bastard just tried to crack your head open. But that didn't happen, Vermouth pointed out. You're right. It's all thanks to how skilled you are, Sienna agreed sarcastically. You noticed and took care of it quickly before I even needed to do anything. But you know what? I really don't like that bastard, so I want to first teach him a lesson by making him eat dirt. I should have the right to do so, no? Sienna. Fine, I've got it. Without any further complaints, Sienna instead just pouted her lips. As she did so, she glanced at Anise, who was walking beside them. Anise was looking straight ahead with a calm expression, but Sienna clearly recalled how the corner of Anise's mouth had twitched slightly in amusement when she sensed the attack coming from behind them. Like I've always said, I'm the only normal person in this party, Sienna thought. While Anise usually served Vermouth faithfully and always added Sir to his name, deep down she seemed to have been looking forward to seeing Vermouth get hit by the stone Hamel had just kicked. The place that Vermouth led Hamel to was an ordinary restaurant that could be found just about anywhere. In this sort of roadside diner, a few mercenaries could always be found drinking at this time of the day. In fact, a weathered group of mercenaries really was sitting together and holding a raucous drinking party in the middle of the restaurant. Perhaps because of the noise, these mercenaries were the sole customers in this restaurant. So why had he chosen this restaurant? Unable to understand the reasoning behind this choice, Sienna shot a glance at Vermouth, but she soon realized why this restaurant had been chosen. The moment that these mercenaries who had just been catcalling Sienna and Anise with lustful eyes, saw Hamel's face as he walked in behind the two women, their faces paled in horror like they had just run into a devil. Hamel didn't even need to say a word or look at them, but the mercenaries quietly set down the bottles of booze they had been drinking and immediately got up from their seats. Pay the bill before you go. Hamel tossed these words at the mercenaries just as they were about to leave the restaurant. And make sure to leave a generous tip for the store owner who had to open up his restaurant early in the day because of you. The mercenaries meekly replied, Why, sir? If you're going to be paying the man, I'll also be quite grateful if you leave something to take care of our tab as well, Hamel threw in. All right, the mercenaries powerlessly agreed. In the end, the mercenaries were left with no choice but to leave the entire contents of their wallets on the checkout counter before leaving. Before Vermouth had even chosen a seat, Hamel pulled out an empty seat and plopped his ass on it. You really are a piece of trash, aren't you? Sienna said with a haughty sniff, still heavily dissatisfied with Hamel. Tilting her head to the side at a crooked angle, she glared at Hamel and asked, You're a mercenary and they are mercenaries, so aren't you both colleagues in the same line of work? It's because we have a bond from being colleagues in the same line of work that we're happy to pay for each other's meals. So isn't it fine if I just pay for these bastards' meals some other time? Hamel argued. As if you'd do something like that, Sienna scoffed. Aren't you being too rude for someone I just met today? No, just now in fact. Hamel pointed out. And also I've been wondering for a while now. Just why have you dyed your hair purple? Is it because you want to be more recognizable on the battlefield? It's not dyed. Sienna yelled as she squinted her eyes in anger and pulled off her hat. She abruptly lowered her head to show him the hair roots at the top of her head and said, I've had purple hair ever since I was young. A foolish mercenary like you might not be aware of this, but beings like me who are loved by mana and magic, their favor can physically affect our constitution. For the favor of mana to actually turn your hair purple, that's quite a trivial show of favor, Hamel commented. Should she just kill him? Flames sparked in Sienna's eyes as she glared at Hamel. You've got quite the sharp tongue, Anise said as she stared at Hamel with narrowed eyes. With his old worn-out cloak and the scars on his face, his appearance wasn't anywhere close to polished, and even the way he spoke was abrasive. Sir Vermouth, must it really be this mercenary in particular? Anise pleaded. As I've said, Vermouth confirmed with a shrug. Hamel might be weaker than me, but he's still very strong. We'd be able to prove that to you if we competed with each other right now, but I don't want to hurt Hamel's pride by competing with him when he's still not very familiar with me. A warrior must respect his fellow warriors, Mullen, who casually took a seat next to Hamel, said seriously as he puffed out his chest proudly. In reaction to these words that seemed to have come out of the blue, everyone turned to look at Mullen. Why has this savage-looking person suddenly started talking like a fool? Hamel eventually asked. Hey, who do you think you are to call Molan a fool? Sienna grabbed hold of the chance to immediately reprimand Hamel. At the same time, she subtly drew on her mana to put pressure on Hamel and even went so far as to draw on her magic staff, Asha, which was held beneath her robes for extra strength. If Hamel were to suddenly attack her like he had before, she was thinking of correcting this little quirk of his and making him realize the pecking order between them. What's the matter with calling him a fool when he acts like one? No, hold on a second. Molan? Vermouth. Hamel belatedly realized what those names meant and quickly spun his head between the two men. Although he had heard himself be called a fool several times now, Molan didn't show any offense and was staring fixedly at the kitchen. His only concern seemed to be when the dishes he had ordered would be served. Molan Roar, son of the snowfields, Hamel finally said. Have you heard of my bravery? Molan's head spun back as he responded to Hamel's muttered words with shining eyes. However, Hamel had already torn his gaze away from Molan and was looking at Vermouth, who was sitting across from them. And you're Vermouth? Vermouth Lionheart, right? The master of the holy sword, the hero of light. Hamel asked in confirmation. That's what they call me, Vermouth replied with a gentle expression. By this point, Hamel had no choice but to let out a snort and shake his head in disbelief. Why hadn't he recognized them immediately? When every one of these four people, even when taken on their own, were all extraordinary individuals with unique appearances. There was the beautiful and voluptuous blonde priest with a benevolent face that always seemed to be smiling. But in contrast to her appearance, a heavy mace was hanging from her waist. In this type of era, it wasn't uncommon to see priests carrying arms, but clerics who insisted on wearing clerical robes instead of wearing armor while still proudly carrying a mace weren't a common sight. The Saint of Light, Anise Slywood. As for the witch who had been quibbling with him since earlier while clicking her tongue at him, that cheeky face blatantly revealed her internal dislike of him without even the slightest intention of hiding it. Her purple hair wasn't dyed but was instead altered into that color by her powerful mana. Finally, her green eyes reminded him of a forest. The arch-wizard Sienna Meridian. Every one of them was a famous individual. Molan Roar was the son of the war chief of the Buyur tribe, which was famously known as a tribe with an exceptional talent for fighting, even among the other native tribes that lived in that cold northern land. Anise Slywood was the saint of light that the Holy Empire kept hidden from the rest of the world. It was said that the light Anise could emit all by herself was even more intense and brilliant than the light emitted by dozens of priests working together. The divine magic she could call upon was known as the realization of miracles, as it could heal the crippled, open the eyes of the blind and even reattach fallen limbs in an instant. Sienna Meridian, a young witch who, despite being a human, was raised by the hands of the elves. One day she suddenly left the Samar rainforest and descended onto the battlefields outside the forest, where monsters and demonic beasts ran rampant. There she acted like the very incarnation of a natural disaster, lighting winds and flames sweeping across the ground with each flash of her staff. Finally, there was Vermouth Lionheart, a survivor from the northern kingdom of Ashel. He had been taken captive by the demon folk when he was only 15. Then, while being transported to Helmuth, he revealed himself to be a monstrous genius when he, along with Molan, annihilated the accompanying demon folk and rescued the other slaves with the help of a single sword. After that, he headed over to the Holy Empire and received the recognition of the Holy Sword, becoming the hero of light. Well, now isn't this something? Hamel muttered as his lips twitched into a slight smile. They were all famous heroes that he had heard about more than once. Rumors about them may have abounded, but this was Hamel's first time meeting any of them in person. So why have the famous hero of light and his companions come looking for an insignificant mercenary like myself? Hamel asked sarcastically. It looks like you have a clear understanding of your place. I really don't like you very much, but as long as you're aware of your position and know when to bow your head, I think I can learn to tolerate you, Sienna said with a smile. Should he hit her just once? Could he even hit her? While clenching his fists below the table, Hamel glared at Sienna. Let's stop goading each other, Vermouth spoke up. The sound of his voice instantly calmed the hostile atmosphere that had been starting to simmer at the table as he continued. The food will be coming out soon. Oh, Molan grunted in excitement as he leaped from his seat. Then he suddenly picked up the entire table and hurriedly ran over to the kitchen. He had decided that rather than having them bring up each plate one by one, it would be more convenient to just pick up the entire dining table and use it as a tray. Hamel muttered. He's one crazy son of... Molen is just kind, Anise spoke up, cutting Hamel off. She popped open the lid of her holy water flask, shook it gently, then brought it to her nose to sniff the scent rising from its mouth as she continued. Do you really think that he's such a fool that he would foolishly allow you to keep calling him a fool? Even if Molen's personality isn't as savage as yours, do you really think that he will just keep laughing quietly if he keeps getting mocked for being a fool? So what? Is he going to try and smash my head in? Hamel challenged. Why don't you find out the answer to that yourself? Anise responded. You'll be able to tell whether he's a fool or an idiot by... Crosh. A large sound rang out from behind. Looking over to see what had happened, they realized that it was the sound of the table being crushed into pieces because it couldn't withstand the strength of Molen's grip. The dishes that had already been placed on the table were sent falling because of this, but Molen quickly picked up each of the plates as they fell with an agility that seemed unnatural with his large bulk and threw them back up into the air. The plates sent flying through the air landed on the table that had been next to theirs. Boom. The building shook slightly in reaction to Molen's violent movements that had left several deep footprints on the floor. Vermouth will pay the repair fees, Molen announced. What a fool. Anise sighed and shook her head. It seems that he's all right with being called a fool because he really is one, Hamel snidely pointed out. That might be the case, but you, Hamel, have no right to call Molen a fool. The only ones who can say that Molen is a fool are Molen's friends and comrades, Anise declared. That's right. Sienna piped up. Who do you think you are to keep calling Molen a fool? It's true that Molen might be a fool, but it's not okay for you to call Molen a fool, got it? Just why have you guys brought me here? Hamel asked abruptly, unable to understand the situation he had found himself in no matter how hard he tried. Vermouth's expression hadn't changed as he listened to the entire conversation. But just as Molen stretched his arms wide and started to carry the new table over to where the rest were sitting, Vermouth suddenly asked, Hamel Dinas, are you willing to become my companion? Molen showed no intention of paying any attention to their conversation. He placed the new table in the middle of their seats, then immediately stretched his hand towards a large pork leg roast. At this, Sienna, who was sitting beside him, smacked the back of his hand. After a start of surprise, Molen nodded his head agreeably. Then Molen held his large hands out in front of him. Once he did this, Sienna shook her finger and drew a circle, casting a spell that covered Molen's hands in bubbling foam and water. After his hands had been cleaned, Molen reached out for the pork leg once more. Slop. This time, Anise smacked the back of Molen's hand. The sudden blow had Molen looking at her with a confused expression. While glaring at Molen through narrowed eyes, Anise snapped open a napkin and laid it down on her knees. Then she picked up a knife and fork and held them up for Molen to see. Molen grunted in realization and nodded as he placed a napkin on his knees like Anise had. But because of how thick Molen's thighs were, the napkin wasn't even able to cover one of his legs. Molen then picked up a knife and a fork in his large hands. They definitely hadn't been made to be held by such large hands, so Molen had to hold them by his fingertips to use them. Creak creak. Molen began slicing off pieces of the meat with frustrated eyes. With each stroke of his knife, the old table let out creaking noises. His knife skills didn't show any traces of refinement, but Sienna and Anise, who were responsible for teaching Molen manners, had happy looks on their faces as they exchanged glances. While those three were doing all this, Hamel was busy thinking about Vermouth's last words. Vermouth wanted him to become a companion? Hamel couldn't understand what these words meant. Vermouth, Sienna, Anise, and Molen were the most famous heroes on the whole continent, and their party had enough combat force to face off against one of the demonfolk's many legions. As for Hamel, he had already been planning to take a ship in this port and head over to Helmuth. Most of the wars fought in the lands of Tiraz had ended. The demon folk and demonic beasts had now withdrawn to Helmuth, and the monsters had been exterminated to such an extent that they could no longer field any armies. There were no longer any battlefields left in these lands for Hamel to participate in. However, that wasn't enough for Hamel. Hamel wanted to kill even more monsters, demonic beasts, and demon folk. If possible, he wanted to wipe them out until none were left in this world. Was it for the sake of world peace? No. Hamel's desire wasn't born out of such a wonderful sense of duty. He just hated them. He wanted to kill all of them, so that he would never have to set eyes on one of them again. As such, he wanted to wipe out all demonic beasts, demon folk, and even the demon kings. It was for such an incredibly personal reason that Hamel had decided to head over to Helmuth. Over there, every day was filled with unending battles. Although reinforcements were being sent to Helmuth from all over the continent, Helmuth's own forces were still leaving behind mountains of human corpses day after day. Hamel had always attributed his continued survival until now to several factors. The first was that he was strong, the second was that he was a genius, and the third was that he had good luck. But he knew that once he traveled to Helmuth, then perhaps his luck would run out. Even if he was strong and a genius, he would probably still die anyway. But even so, Hamel felt that it didn't matter. His was a life that should have already been lost long ago in any case. He had been lucky enough to survive so far, but rather than continuing to live out of gratitude for his lucky survival, he would much rather live according to his desires and keep his eyes on the targets of his hatred to get this revenge. Even if he did end up dying in Helmuth, as long as he could kill at least one more demon folk or demonic beast before he died, he felt he could be satisfied with that. A companion, you say? Hamel repeated as the corners of his mouth twitched up in a smile. If he were to become a companion of the famous hero Vermouth, he might be able to survive for a longer period in Helmuth. That fact alone might be enough for Hamel to be willing to become Vermouth's companion. I don't care what you want from me, but I don't really want to listen to the orders of some scrub who's weaker than me, all right? Hamel said challengingly. But Hamel really couldn't stand the attitudes that all four people in front of him had shown so far. It was as if they didn't really feel they needed to take someone like him with them. Even Molin, for all his friendliness, seemed convinced that he was stronger than Hamel. Sienna and Anise had clearly shown that they couldn't understand why Hamel was even qualified to become their comrade. Hamel wasn't satisfied with any of this. No matter how strong they were, just how highly did they think of themselves? Did he really look like some scrub to them? They're just asking for a beating, Hamel thought. Puhaha. Sienna, who was in the middle of cutting off a slice of meat for herself, burst into laughter. What did that bastard just say? Did he really just say, scrub? Vermouth, he was talking to you, right? Right? Ha 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 ha. In a quavering voice, Anise said, Sienna, don't laugh so hard. If you start laughing like that, then I'll... Pooh-hoo. Pooh-hoo, paha. A laughing like this is... a big insult. As expected, you really are a true warrior. Molin said as he looked at Hamel with a big smile. Bonk. Hamel tilted his chair back and then slammed both feet on top of the table. At this action, both Sienna and Anise's laughter was abruptly cut off. Fwoosh. Vermouth, Sienna uttered in a dangerous tone as small wisps of flame ignited around her. He's just a bastard of a mercenary that you could find just about anywhere. Is there really any reason we need to take someone like him with us? I wasn't expecting much, but isn't he far too crude? Anise chimed in. Sir Vermouth, rather than a mercenary like this who's just a wild dog, there are countless other warriors who would be better to choose from. The only son of the Knight Commander of the Kiel Empire is said to have a great appearance and personality along with exceptional skills. Wouldn't it be better to go to Kiel and recruit him instead? Amidst this chilly atmosphere, Molin once again brought up something completely irrelevant. I've heard that the warriors of the Sea Kingdom are truly brave men. I'd really like to compete with them. Well now, everyone else but you really seem to dislike me, don't they? And I don't really want to travel with bastards who dislike me either. So just like that bitchy saintess over there said, why don't you go find some other bastard to take with you? Hamel sneered. No, Vermouth finally spoke up. The sparks Sienna had ignited were extinguished. The light hovering around Anise's feet also disappeared. As he poured some alcohol into his glass with a graceful gesture, Vermouth continued, It has to be you. No one was able to understand what he meant by this claim. Vermouth then said, If you really want to check my skills, how about we finish eating first? What? Hamel asked in confusion. Let's eat and have a drink until we're full, then once we're finished digesting. Vermouth swirled the drink in his glass and then finished with a grin, Let's have a friendly match.